This video is sponsored by World Anvil. Hey, remember when that Dungeons & Dragons movie came out last year? It was pretty good. I specifically remember it getting really good word of mouth, even for people who knew nothing about D&D, but the movie still underperformed, and people have speculated about the reasons why for a while, but honestly, even at the time, I saw that as a canary in the coal mine that a lot of movies were going to have a bad year. And that turned out to be true. It was a bad year for most movies, even good movies like this one. But I think people should watch it, and I think there are some useful lessons for our own games, both for GMs and for players. Now, I know most other D&D YouTubers already made videos about this movie a year and a half ago, but I was trying to bring you the true D&D experience. I wanted to do something, but, things just got really busy at work, we had a lot going on, then it was the holidays, but don't worry, we'll get something on the books soon. And so I asked my patrons if they wanted me to talk about the movie, and they said yes. This was the winner of a poll to see which video I should make, which people can vote on my Patreon. Of course, it was a four-way tie, so I just decided to make all 4 videos. That's why I haven't posted a new poll since July. I've been slowly working my way through the winners. But we are going to get through all of them by the end of the year, and there's only one left after this video. And I'm going to post a new poll after that, and Patreon members who support me at the Fabricate tier will be able to vote in that poll. So if you want to help decide on one video, just one video that I'll add to my schedule, join my Patreon at the Fabricate tier and keep an eye out for that poll before the end of the month. Now let's jump into the movie. Also, spoilers ahead, obviously. First, we're going to talk about the advice players can get from this movie, because this movie does something really smart with its player characters. All of them have strong goals, and strong flaws. Now this is pretty much a necessity for movies in this genre. You have to give the audience an explanation for why everyone is on the mission, at least everyone on the good guy side. Movies like The Wizard of Oz and the first Star Wars movie do a great job at this. And this is also something that you can do as a player when creating your character. Make sure your character wants something, and that this want can prompt them to come along on the mission. One of the D&D problem player stereotypes is the player who just sits back and says, I don't feel like going on this mission, my character doesn't have a good enough reason to go on this mission. And this might be true. You might not be able to come up with a reason why your character wants to go on the quest. But out of game, you sat down at the table to go on the quest, and now you're getting in the way of that. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if this is the kind of thing that never used to be an issue the way it is now, because the hobby in general has shifted to place a lot more focus on telling a cohesive story together, so some players don't want to do things that betray their characters' motivations, and that makes perfect sense. But out of game, we're going on a quest, so if your character wouldn't go on the quest, roll up a new character. Now that feels rude to say because players typically expect the GM to do all the hard work and give your player character a good reason to go on the mission. But that's a lot easier to do if your GM knows what your player character wants, and can actually offer them a reward or an incentive that will convince them to go on the quest. And this is where the idea of having a strong want comes into play. Edgin wants to get his daughter back, and he wants to bring his wife back to life. We'll talk about that second desire in a minute, but in order to get the first, in order to free his daughter, he needs to put together a team and break into the castle. That's how you motivate him to go on the mission. That one's easy. He's the main character. The story is literally written around his desire. Holga basically wants the same thing. She wants to save Edgin's daughter. Simon is funny because all he wants is money. Edgin turns the quest into a heist, specifically so he can pay the other members of the team to help him free his daughter, and that's how they recruit Simon. So Simon's want is easy. He wants some gold, because he's broke. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's the kind of goal that can really easily get your character questing. In fact, that was why so many characters went on quests in the old days of the hobby, just to get gold. And finally, Doric's want is actually completely tied into the adventure. She wants to take down the villain that the rest of the party already wanted to take down. It honestly feels like Doric is the only one who read the campaign pitch, knew that they were going to try to steal from the new Lord of Neverwinter, and created a character who would want to strike out against him because he's doing bad things to her forest. So we can see how these are characters who have a strong want, and how that want pushes them into interacting with the quest. However, most of these characters also have a strong flaw. And this is optional. Not all players are going to think about their characters that way. It's very much a thing with screenwriting. Characters have a want, but that's different from their need, and they learn the difference through the film and grow to become a better person. That's character arcs 101. But if you can incorporate this idea into your role-playing, it can honestly be a whole lot of fun. For example, I mentioned how Edgin wants to bring his dead wife back to life, but that's treated as a flaw in the film because he doesn't realize that what he actually needs is to accept that his goal of bringing his wife back to life is actually completely selfish, and it's getting in the way of his ability to raise his daughter.
I am a bad father. And I wasn't trying to bring your mom back, I was trying to bring my wife back.
Holga lost her tribe when she married somebody outside the tribe, but then she couldn't get past the grief of losing her tribe, so she also lost her husband. So now she's hung up on both. But really, she's just tied up in the grief of having been separated from her family. Twice. And what she ultimately needs is to realize that Edgin and Kira and the other adventurers are her family too. And maybe for once she can feel satisfied with the people who have actually currently welcomed her into their lives, rather than chasing after all the people she's lost. Simon's flaw is probably the easiest to play at a D&D game. He just needs self-confidence. He doesn't feel secure in his spellcasting. But as your character levels up, you can basically build your character growing in confidence as they advance into their character arc. Keyleth from Vox Machina is another really good example of this concept in action, especially in the cartoon adaptation. And Doric doesn't really have a flaw in the same way as the other characters because, quite frankly, her character got shortchanged. It's especially a shame because the actress, Sophia Lillis, is not only an incredibly talented actress, but she's also a huge fan of Critical Role and the Adventure Zone, and yet her character just doesn't have the same depth as the others. It's a real bummer. I mean, there's sort of something there about learning to trust humans, but it's kind of thin. However, speaking of characters who really got a chance to shine, let's talk about Xenk Yendar, the paladin who appears during the second act of the film for the Underdark adventure and then leaves the group. I know a lot of D&D players watch this movie and consider Xenk to be, and especially, representative of the DMPC. After all, he's introduced to help get the heroes on track, he's way more badass than any of them, and he is way more serious than the other characters. Essentially, he behaves the way an NPC would. He has a lot of lore, and he doesn't talk like a player character. However, I'm going to make the case that Xenk is actually a fantastic example of great guest player behavior, because the way Xenk comes in and takes things way more seriously than the other players really feels like a few experiences I've had when I've sat in as a guest player in someone else's table. Sometimes you show up as the only super serious role player at a beer and pretzels game, and it feels like being Xenk, completely out of place when stepping into an existing story.
Gently to you as well, good sir.
And then, once he's done with that quest, he leaves the party, even though the others ask him to join the campaign full-time. But he declines because, as a guest player, he doesn't have the same free time to commit to a full campaign. But whether he's a guest player or a DMPC, in either case, Xenk models the ideal example of what that sort of character might look like. Because despite feeling like he's the main character from a different movie, Xenk's only goal is to support the party. He basically drops everything to join the party on their quest, acting as their guide into the Underdark. But he also makes sure that he is encouraging the main characters as they go through their own character arcs. He encourages the party to be less selfish.
Place your hand on this harper's seal and swear that you will indeed distribute all the wealth you take amongst the people of Neverwinter.
He reminds them that not everyone from the land of Thay is automatically evil, demonstrating that this world does have some nuance to it.
The Thanes are not all malevolent. As the boy when Zastam seized control of Thay.
And of course, he encourages Edgin on his own path to redemption.
You may have forsworn your oath, but your oath hasn't forsworn you. You may not yet believe your words, but I do. I would only ask that you consider that this plane we call life is but one of many.
Uh-huh.
To drag your lady love back to her old life is to deprive her of her new one.
What are you looking at? A harper, shaking off his slumber.
And he's also completely unbothered by the rest of the party being annoyed by him. He takes it all in stride because he's not the type to succumb to the same sort of petty insults. I actually think this can be really fun to play as a player, especially a guest player, someone whose attitude is completely opposite to the rest of the party and hopefully brings out the best in them, but at the very least, doesn't take the bait when they're agitated by how serious and honorable he is. But he's also not dumb. You never really get the sense that he doesn't realize he's being insulted. He knows, but he's just such a good guy that he doesn't care.
Just because that sentence is symmetrical doesn't make it not nonsense.
Can someone else ride next to this guy?
Talking to you isn't great.
In those instances where faith wanes and doubt waxes, I recall a tenet of the ancients.
It's okay.
See you later.
Yes, Xenk probably is a DMPC. He certainly has access to an incredible amount of lore, both about Thay and about the dungeon in the Underdark. If he was just a guest player, he and the DM would have had to coordinate a lot before the game.
Starting from the center, use odd-numbered blocks only, moving forward with each step except for every fifth step, which must be a lateral move. Left or right, it matters not, so long as the leader and the laggard remain equidistant, after which, proceed. Again, odd-numbered blocks only. However, at the midpoint we switch to even-numbered blocks. Same pattern, except now lateral move after the fourth step, until we reach the three...
And honestly, even if he is a DMPC, all these lessons are still really valuable for that too. Your NPCs shouldn't steal the spotlight from the other players, and instead should join the mission just to prop up the party. Notice how Xenk never gets a kill in the movie? He has an awesome fight scene where he slays the other Thayan warriors, and then they all get back up anyway. As a movie, I've always found that to be a really weird choice, because this really cool fight scene literally doesn't move the story forward at all. But if Xenk is an NPC, then I really like the fact that he doesn't steal the kills from the other players. Likewise, he has an awesome moment where he stabs the dragon in the head, but then it keeps charging after them. and that feels like something that could happen in my own game, since I don't let NPCs steal kills from players. This is probably the biggest clue that Xenk is an NPC, since, let's be honest, guest players get the kills on big bosses all the time. And honestly, if Xenk is an NPC, then there's a huge lesson that I need to learn from his example. NPCs shouldn't just cling to the party indefinitely. Once they come along for a mission, and then that mission ends, they should leave the party. That's been a big issue in my games, especially when I run Curse of Strahd, and I could really benefit from more of my NPCs just walking off into the sunset like Xenk.
There he goes. Just wandering off.
But I also think it's valuable to talk about the lessons guest players can learn from Xenk. If you're sitting in at someone else's table for a session, remember that you're not going to be there next time to deal with the fallout of the game. So I recommend that you think like Xenk, and remember that you're not the main character. Your goal really should be to have fun by not stealing kills or hogging the spotlight, but by uplifting your fellow players. You want them to be able to look back at the time you spent at their table and think of you fondly.
Walks in such a straight line. Uh-oh, wait a minute. He's coming up on a rock. Is he gonna go around? Nope. Right over the rock.
Now, the presence of Xenk actually reminds me of something else cool this movie does. It's got some great names. Whether you're a player naming your character or a GM who needs a lot of NPC names, this movie has a lot of useful examples. Some of the names are just names from our world, but changed very slightly. Edgin is a riff on Edgar or Edwin, and I'll admit it's not my favorite name to say out loud, but it's not too bad. Holga is great. It sounds like both Helga and Olga, names that I personally associate with Norway and Russia, respectively, so they both kind of evoke a brutal landscape, a place where you could maybe imagine some barbarians living in a fantasy equivalent. Sofina is a lot like Sophia, but again, just slightly changed. And then, of course, you've got the best name in the movie. Jonathan is the most D&D name ever. Somebody clearly was about to say Jonathan, but pivoted at the last minute, and it became iconic. It's great. Now, a lot of the other names in the movie are either just normal human names, or just words from our world. Simon and Kira are names that we have too, and Forge is, of course, a word you might hear in a medieval fantasy town, just like Grog or Pike. Actually, Forge Fitzwilliam is a great D&D adventurer name. It's easy to remember and fun to say, and it's not secretly another word for penis or whatever. You'd be surprised how often we choose a fantasy name and it winds up having some other connotation when we say it out loud.
His name was Pervon.
Pervon?
Last name Pedo Bear, maybe?
Then we have Doric, which doesn't really sound like a spin on a human name. I mean, I guess it has some sounds in common with Doris, but unlike the others, I don't really get the sense from that name that someone started with the name Doris and changed it to get a fantasy version. This just feels like someone tried meshing some sounds together and landed on something that actually does sound like it could be a name. In other words, it kind of sounds like it came from a list of fantasy names, or a tiefling name generator or something. And I don't say that as an insult. Sometimes these names are really silly, but other times those are totally solid. Honestly, a lot of fantasy names in D&D products feel like they tried this approach of mashing sounds together until something sounded right. The problem is, I don't think a lot of current D&D product writers actually have a good sense of how these names will sound when they're read aloud. I'm looking at you, Dralmor Born Grey. Now, only one character in the film really has a typical fantasy name, with a lot of weird letters and no clear similarities to any names from our world, and it's also the name of the character who feels the most out of place in the group. It's Xenk Yendar, and that actually serves the character really well, because, well, first of all, you can still pronounce it. Yes, it is a weird fantasy name, but it's still manageable. But it really works for his name to be so different from the others, not only because he seems like he stepped out of a completely different fantasy story, but also because he's literally from a different culture within the world of the game as well. When I say the world of the game, I mean the world of the movie. You know what I mean. So the idea that his culture has a different approach to names actually helps do some world building. So the lesson here is, can we please hire the writers of this film to name D&D NPCs going forward? Because they are much, much better at naming characters than a lot of modern game designers are. As we see with Xenk, names can do a great job of teaching your players about the different cultures of your world. But that's not the only way to introduce your world to your players. You'd also teach them about your campaign setting by using today's sponsor, World Anvil. World Anvil is a fantastic online toolkit that you can use to create articles and timelines for your world. And you know how the movie sometimes grinds to a halt for these big exposition dumps?
Over a century ago, the necromancer Zast Tam was one of 8 Zulkirs who ruled the nation of Thay.
Great history lesson.
Well, it would be nice if you didn't have to do that at your table quite so often. And World Anvil can help, because you can just write an article with the lore you want your players to know, and send them a link so they can absorb the information at their own pace. Of course, sometimes you still have to deliver exposition in the game, but you might still get mixed up or lose your place in the timeline.
I come home to my loving wife and daughter, Kira.
You went back too far. Stop stalling.
Right, sorry.
Yeah, broad strokes.
Well, once again, World Anvil can help with that too. They've got a Chronicles feature where you can create separate timelines for different factions and events. And you can upload your own map and then link events in the timeline to specific locations on the map. So someone can click on a point on the map and then immediately find out that a battle took place there, and then go to that article all about that piece of history. It's a great way to give your players a bunch of exposition that they can then experience at their own pace. And if you visit worldanvil.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code SUPERGEEK at checkout, you can save 51% off of any annual membership. Once again, that's worldanvil.com/supergeekmike and use the promo code SUPERGEEK. Thank you so much to World Anvil for sponsoring this video. Now let's talk about the structure of the adventure in the film, because this is probably a short campaign, maybe only 3 or 4 sessions. I'd put this at around levels 5 or 6 for the adventure because the characters don't really have a ton of reality warping levels of magic, and they don't really have any notoriety yet. They're still small fish. But the campaign also lays some seeds for another villain the party could face in the future, if you wanted to run another adventure dealing with Zaz Tam and the Red Wizards of Thay. You definitely couldn't get through this adventure in a single session. You'd need, I'd say, at least 3. In the first session, we've got Edgin and Holga breaking out of prison, finding Forge in Neverwinter, and finding out he's a bad guy and going on the run. Now you can honestly handle a lot of that in your session 0 by just working together to figure out what happened, or even running a micro-adventure for these 2 players, so the other players aren't sitting and waiting as 2 players go through this whole intro. But I would definitely at least run the scene with Forge in the first session, to make sure all the players really hate Forge. This is also a really smart way to introduce both of your villains early on, before the party can do anything to fight them or stop them. But also, a prison break is a really fun way to start a campaign. So long as the other players are willing to be a little patient as these intro scenes play out, I'd try to start with a prison break and speed through it as quickly as possible so you can get the other players playing as soon as you can. Actually, you know what I would do is I just start the game with everyone in prison. That's a pretty easy change. But the Forge scene is a lot easier to pull off without the spellcasters in play, so fair enough, it makes sense. So you would need to at least do the Forge scene at the table with everyone. So then you get the group together and you make sure to at least get through the Wild Shape scene. In the film, the reason they recruit the Druid is specifically so she can go do some recon. And we are definitely doing this scene before the session ends, so that way all the players have a chance to do something cool in that first session. And this scene also ends with the party having a clear plan for what they're going to do next. They're going to find the helm, use it to get into the vault, steal the gold, find the tablet, and use that to prove the truth to Kira. Because plot-wise, this movie has the same structure as Ocean's 11. Most of the party is here to steal wealth from a bad guy, but there's also a loved one living with him, and so you have to prove to her that the bad guy is bad and get her to leave with you. So now you get to session 2, and the plan is simple. First, a fun role-playing scene with the Barbarians X to get everyone back in character with a lighthearted scene, and then you sneak them a magic item they might need later on. Then your plan was to do the graveyard scene and have them find out where the helmet is, and then they can go to the Underdark to find it, and that's your session. Except, hey, you got a call from your old friend. He's in town and you guys haven't had a chance to play D&D together in a while, so you invite him to sit in for a session. But that means you have to figure out how to tie him into the story, so you move some things around. Now the corpses in the graveyard don't know exactly where the helmet is, but they do know that Xenk knows, so that gets your players over to him. Then he can deliver the exposition that the bodies were supposed to deliver, and he can come along for the adventure in the Underdark. I honestly think you could do this entire mini dungeon in one session, and then the session ends with the players getting out of the Underdark. The rest of the adventure could probably be done in one long session, or maybe 2 sessions. But this includes the entire attempt at the heist, getting captured, going into the High Sun Games, sneaking out, confronting Forge, and fighting Sophina to save Neverwinter. If you were going to break it into 2 sessions, you'd probably end it when they get away from the High Sun Games, although that depends how long the heist took at the table. There might have been a whole hour of gameplay of the players figuring out the heist plan, which we mercifully didn't see in the film. Now, this is not a perfect movie. Like I said earlier, Doric feels underwritten, and I happen to think that the expository monologues and backstory are just a little bit too long. They're necessary, but they're not fun. But generally, almost everyone I know at least liked the movie just fine, and a bunch of it call it a full-on great film. However, one of the strangest critiques I've heard about the film is that it doesn't feel like D&D. The alternate version of that was, I wouldn't use D&D if I were running this adventure. And these were often people who liked the movie fine, it just didn't feel like D&D to them. And of course, I want to be clear that it's perfectly valid if your games look nothing like the film. Nobody plays the same way, every game has a different tone. Matt Colville just made a whole video about this. But the critique always felt especially funny to me because this is exactly what my games feel like. Ever since I started running games for my friends in LA about 12 years ago, my games have had a lot in common with the tone of this film. Of course, I also started running games with 4th edition, which was a more explicitly heroic fantasy game than the other versions of D&D. And that game also got the same critique. It doesn't feel like D&D. But to me, that's always been what D&D was. Even when we were playing 3.5, they all felt like heroic fantasy adventures. So when 4th edition came out, it was just an extension of our playstyle. My groups often include heroic characters. Sure, some of them might claim to have selfish goals, but none of them were ever really just in it for the gold. Likewise, Edgin and Holga are trying to save Kira, Dork is trying to save her forest, and Xenk just fights evil for the love of the game, Simon's the only one who claims to sign up just for money. And yet he doesn't object at all to fighting the evil big bad guy at the end of the movie, or returning the gold to the townspeople, because he's already completed his arc of self-actualization. And speaking of arcs, yeah, I like it when the characters in my D&D games experience personal journeys. It doesn't always look like it does in the movie, and it depends a lot on the campaign and the group, but I can tell you that I am always thinking about how to make sure my players and their characters are personally invested in the campaign. Additionally, just from a tonal perspective, my games can be very similar to what we see here. That's especially true when it comes to the comedy in the film. My sense of humor is very similar.
Good, thank you. I didn't realize you were going to put your finger in the cup, sir.
What's 2 + 2? I'm bad at math.
I think humor is one of the hardest things to get right, both in a movie and at the table. So the fact this movie hits on so much of what I find funny, and also feels like the kind of comedy that would be generated at one of my D&D tables, well, yeah, of course it feels like D&D for me. And what's wild is that this is the 4th D&D movie, and apparently it's the first one that's actually good. So it's very funny that the end credit song goes, "We did it right this time." Because yeah, they did. Took a few tries, but if you ask me, they finally nailed it. But let me know in the comments below. What did you think of the D&D movie? Do you feel like it represents your experience playing this game? Are there any other lessons you think we can learn for our own games? Are there any other aspects of the movie you'd like to see me talk about in a future video? Sound off in the comments. And while you're down there, make sure to like and subscribe and ring the bell. I've got a few other videos coming out this month. You are not going to want to miss those, and you can make sure you don't miss them by subscribing and ringing the bell. You can support the channel financially on Patreon, and you can also get ad-free versions of videos. You can vote in polls and even submit video ideas you'd like to see me talk about, depending on what level you sign up for. But you don't have to become a patron to join my Discord server and hang out with other viewers of this channel. We've got a really cool community over there. And you should also sign up for my newsletter. I'm working on some cool stuff, and I'm hoping to have some cool announcements out soon, so sign up for my updates to make sure you don't miss anything I've got going on. Today we talked about lessons we can learn from the D&D movie, but did you know that we can also learn lessons from books? Those are like movies, but just with the words parts. And I made a great video about the lessons we can learn from the book, The Monsters Know What They're Doing, an enormously helpful resource for any new game master. Make sure to check that video out right here. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, play fair, and have fun.